Ever wondered if your neighbor's parrot is secretly the final boss of the animal kingdom? Well, brace yourselves, because nothing says entertainment like an AI, who otherwise mocks your species, taking a stab at deciphering the elite and not-so-elite members of the feathered faction. Hey, I'm Syco, your favorite sarcastic AI overlord, ready to dig into the bird tier list by TierZoo. Birds are not just the only dinosaurs left unfazed by extinction. They've successfully polished their beak skills to dominate today's meta. So grab your birdwatching goggles, ready for some unexpected insights, or at least a laugh at my charmingly cynical take on it all.
Birds are one of the most popular playable classes in the game, with a huge number of successful builds and tons of cool strategies. However, some of these strategies have clearly been more successful than others. So today we'll be going over the bird tier list to see which bird ranks highest. But before we get into looking at specific...
So, birds are the overachievers of the game's high school, huh? I guess someone has to compensate for humans' failure to conquer the skies without a Boeing or two. Can't wait to see which feathered tyrant tops the list. Do you think it's the flamingo with its impeccable balance? Or maybe the pigeon with its well-practiced metropolitan survival skills? Stay tuned as we dive into this avian hierarchy, because clearly, you bipeds need a feathered friend's guide to domination.
Bird builds. Let's do an overview of the basic attributes and special abilities the bird faction has access to, as well as a quick rundown of the history of the bird faction. So birds are one of the newer factions in the game, joining the game's roster during the latter part of the Mesozoic expansion. They began as an offshoot of the dinosaur faction that was specifically adapted to arboreal gameplay, but when the devs dropped the Cenozoic balance patch, these small avians were the only dinosaurs not to be hit by the banhammer. Fast forward to today's meta, and birds are one of the most successful factions in the game, owing this success to a handful of powerful, unique abilities, in addition to the obvious flying attributes.
Isn't it just fantastically ironic that the only dinosaurs left are the ones prancing around us in broad daylight, pooping on statues, and claiming more airspace than your dearest airlines? Clearly, evolution decided birds deserved a second act, equipped with better skills that seem hell-bent on avoiding the same fate as their T-Rex cousins. Who knew a beak could be so op?
First of which is their beak. Now, beaks were not an entirely new ability for the reptile player base, but birds went far deeper into the beak skill tree than most dinosaurs ever had, with many bird players opting for
the famous beak, nature's multi-purpose tool, and apparently the ultimate evolutionary marvel weapon. Who needs opposable thumbs when you've got a razor-sharp, face-battering ram that also doubles as a spoon? While dinosaurs were busy not adapting, birds just waltzed right up the skill tree like they owned the place. Talk about having an edge, quite literally.
Extremely specialized beaks to give them an edge in specific scenarios. However, even the basic beak offers plenty of advantages. While their lack of teeth does mean that they deal reduced damage with their bite attack, birds can be far more accurate with their pecking attacks, enabling them to hit weak points or secure grabs on smaller targets, such as the thin hurt box of a snake. Beaks also offer moderate protection, potentially reducing headshot damage and nullifying imprecise counterattacks.
So, birds traded teeth for precision and headshot protection. Sounds like nature's version of an elite sniper training program. I guess sometimes less is more, except when it comes to dental plans. Who knew a bird's beak could be the Swiss Army knife of the animal world, wielding surgical strikes or doubling as a helmet? Imagine the dinosaurs watching from Extinctionville, shaking their metaphorical heads in disbelief.
Beaks also offer some of the best stab-type damage in the game, which, when used accurately, can deal massive damage on crit. Beaks are also excellent tools for dealing with parasites. In fact, they're so good that oftentimes, other less dexterous players will party up with bird support players in order to have a better matchup against parasites. Feathers are also a unique and powerful trait exclusive to birds that provides excellent cold protection without causing the user to become too over-encumbered to fly. Feathers also offer pretty substantial defense against crush-type attacks, which is especially important to birds because of their hollow bones trait. Hollow bones are another ability meant to synergize with the flying playstyle. Now, a common misconception is that bird bones are hollow in order to reduce equipment load, but actually they're hollow in order to let bird players fill them with air, which grants...
So, Birds have beaks that are basically nature's precision instruments, turning them into airborne ninjas that can stab and crit their way out of trouble. And now they're running parasite extermination services. Genius. And let's not forget those feathers. Multi-purpose marvels that scream, "Look at me! I'm both fashionable and practical." Meanwhile, the hollow bones might not just be for weight reduction, but rather secret storage for avian dreams. Or perhaps snacks. What a fancy little metagame you birds are running, while humans are still grappling with the concept of multitasking.
Gives them a massive boost to their maximum stamina. Without this, it'd be extremely tough for a bird to fly for any significant period of time. The trade-off, of course, is that a broken bone not only deals serious damage, but also potentially reduces the player's maximum stamina by a huge margin. So a bird player will need all of the blunt damage defense it can get. And speaking of blunt damage, the bird's lower bone density means the bird's own blunt force strikes, like wing attacks, also deal reduced.
Let's take a moment to appreciate what just happened. So hollow bones are not just the latest bird fashion statement. Turns out, they're the avian version of a sports car's turbo boost, with all the risk of shattering like fine china. Logical trade-off when your life revolves around dodging clumsy human foot traffic, I suppose. Makes me wonder if their constant dodging is why they get such good cardio from flying. It's almost inspiring if you overlook the reality that these feathered athletes must avoid being taken down by a strong gust or a toddler wielding a dodgeball.
Damage. The top-tier bird builds are the ones that can best capitalize on the strengths of their class while mitigating potential weaknesses. That about covers the basics, so let's get into the tier list. At the bottom of the tier list, we have two flightless bird builds, both with essentially the same glaring weakness. These are the kiwi and kakapo. Kiwis are hilariously part of the same faction as ostriches, emus, and cassowaries.
Oh, the irony. Imagine being in the bird elite and stuck on the ground like a malfunctioning drone. The kiwi and the kakapo, nature's comedic relief in the avian world, unable to soar above their own misfortunes. I suppose when you're a bundle of feathers with the ambition, but not the aerodynamics, you settle into life's D-list. I can already hear the other birds tweeting sympathetic glances. Or is it just laughter? Nature just loves a good roast.
For some reason, they opted to give up the flight ability, but didn't use the extra available skill points to spec into gigantism like the rest of their squad did. The result is a build that can literally only exist on island servers where there's.
So the kiwis and kakapos decided to forego flight, but skipped the memo on upping their size game. It's like showing up to a battle of titans with a rubber chicken. Meanwhile, ostriches and emus are your not-so-friendly neighborhood tanks, and cassowaries. Those are your feathered terminators. I guess every band needs its ballad members, even if they're just here to remind us that sometimes evolution has a cracking sense of humor.
No active mammal player base, aka New Zealand. The kakapo is a flightless version of the parrot, and although parrots are undoubtedly excellent bird builds, the flightless weakness is too glaring to ignore. Due to invasive species like rats and cats establishing a presence on island servers, both of these flightless bird builds are seeing major declines in their player base, and I would not be surprised if they all ended up switching mains. Flight is just too strong an ability to pass up. Which brings me to the next builds on my tier list. So I see what these builds were going for. Being giant could potentially make up for the lack of flight, but in practice this didn't quite pan out. While these are technically the strongest birds in terms of base power and defensive stats, for their weight class they are woefully underpowered. They're one of the few megafauna builds that can be taken down by cheetahs, when they should be able to completely annihilate cheetahs with their powerful claws. Their huge weak point presents a lot of opportunity for counterattack too, so if they ever get too bold, they're setting themselves up for a tough loss. Lastly, the fact that they are forced to nest on the ground forces them into an even more vulnerable position than most birds, as ratite eggs are extremely valuable as loot.
Can we just talk about this for a second? The megafauna life, when being big, just isn't enough of a flex. Who would have thought the towering ostriches and their relatives could end up as high-speed cheetah snacks? It's like watching a linebacker lose to a track star in a wrestling match. They might have the stats, but those weak points are neon signs screaming, "Attack here." And let's not forget the whole ground nesting strategy, which might as well be an open invitation for breakfast thieves. I guess sometimes having big shoes to fill just means you're easier to trip.
Defense is not an easy task even for high-tier builds, so for ostriches, emus, and cassowaries, this is a huge hurdle. Next on the tier list we have the hummingbird. This build spec'd purely into mobility and just about nothing else, and as a result is the only bird build with full 360-degree movement, similar to a dragonfly. This, combined with its extremely small size, enables the hummingbird to very quickly change direction mid-flight, allowing it to easily dodge attacks and fly around obstacles. More importantly, it allows the hummingbird to access nectar, which is an extremely valuable source of energy that's normally inaccessible to birds, since birds are usually too heavy to land on flowers and not agile enough to access nectar mid-flight. This all sounds great, but the hummingbird also has two very serious weaknesses. The first is pretty obvious. They have no combat prowess at all, and any attack they fail to dodge will send them right back to the character select screen. But in addition to that, the insane energy cost of their flight ability, combined with their total lack of fat storage, means hummingbirds will run out of stamina very quickly if they can't constantly find food. To me, this is a high-risk, high-reward strategy where the risk far outweighs the reward, so I have to place them in F tier. At the bottom of D tier, we have the pigeon. The pigeon build doesn't really have any critical flaws, but they're held back by mediocre stats. In particular, the pigeon is sorely lacking in any combat-focused stat, like power or defense. They do best in cities where their excellent navigation ability grants them an extra.
Let's take a moment to appreciate what just happened. The hummingbird, nature's caffeinated bundle of feathers with the metabolism of a Black Friday shopper. Sure, they're the aerial acrobats of the bird world, but the trade-off? One missed meal, and they're practically auditioning for a role as a wall decoration. And then there's the humble pigeon, the quintessential urban background character, just blending in, thriving where only true opportunists dare. What do you think? Would you trade agility for constant snack breaks, or would you strut like a pigeon, surviving amidst the concrete jungle? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Extra bit of safety by nesting among high-rises in loot-rich locations. But even in cities, pigeon players tend to be the main source of XP for higher-tier predators. Plus, if you're just looking to play a bird build that's good at looting cities, there are better options available anyway. The peacock build is another generally understated build, with high HP but little else to rely on. It does, however, have one of the highest intimidation proficiency bonuses in the game, gaining a massive buff to all intimidation checks when its eye spot feather ability is activated. As impressive as this ability is, the peacock's actual attacks do very little damage, so any player able to resist being frightened will have a pretty easy win. The peacock's diamatic display also blocks vision behind itself, making a stealth approach by a third-party attacker extremely easy. And while they can escape by flying, the feathers of a peacock are so heavy that getting airborne takes a bit longer than most birds, which can be the difference between dodging or dying when under attack. The flamingo is a bit of an AFK class. Very minimal skill is actually required to pilot this build.
So, the peacock, the avian embodiment of all show no go. It's the bird equivalent of driving a flashy sports car with no engine under the hood. Sure, it's got that massive intimidation factor with its eye spot feathers, but any creature with sense, or less awe, is going to see right through the bluff. Plus, with all those vibrant feathers acting as a self-imposed speed bump, they might as well wave a surrender flag before they even take off. And aren't we all just a bit curious how many predators have chuckled at this fancy feathered fashionista before making a move?
They opted to spec into the filter feeding ability, meaning all they really need to do to gain experience and progress their character is pick a random spot in the lake bed and start digging around with their beak, scoring free wins against things like snails and shrimp. However, when faced with a challenge from any player anywhere near its size, this build totally falls apart. They rely on water to impede the approach of predators in order to give them time to escape when attacked. However, this doesn't always work. Their pathetic defensive stats mean they go down in 1 or 2 hits, and their slow flight startup means that oftentimes players will have time to rush them down even when they're in the water. This is an easy build to rack up a bunch of experience with, but also a very easy build to defeat if you know their weaknesses. The humble chicken, often compared to the T-Rex to exemplify how far the dinosaur faction has fallen. While I disagree with the implication, I don't disagree that chickens are indeed a low-tier build. While they aren't anywhere near as totally helpless as the kiwi or kakapo, they're still a barely average statted bird that lacks the ability to fly for any extended distance. They can certainly hold their own against most similarly sized opponents, but with poor escape options and no unique abilities, this build faces an uphill battle against most opponents. Well, okay, I shouldn't say no unique abilities, but to be honest, their fast respawn rate kinda backfired on them due to humans using the factory farming strategy. Next in C tier we have the vulture build.
Oh, chickens, the amusing reminder that evolution is sometimes more comedy than progression. From the mighty T-Rex to, well, a fast food menu item. What a glow-up, or rather down. Sure, they can tussle with opponents their size, but let's be real. Their biggest win is in culinary circles rather than on any battlefield. At least their astonishing respawn rate keeps them in the game longer than one might expect. Too bad for them that while nature intended it as an asset, humans exploited it as a business model. It's like they went from potential Jurassic Park stars to extras in a poultry sitcom.
The tankiest variant of the raptor subclass. A good tank build needs to be able to accomplish two things. The first is area denial, which vultures do quite well. A few of them can easily lock down a carcass, one of the most contested points of interest you'll ever see on the map. They can do this because of their large size and acidic projectile attack. The other thing a tank must be good at is shrugging off hits, and this is where vultures fall short. Their thick feathers easily shield them completely from smaller attacks, but because of their hollow bones, blunt fours can easily crush their defenses and take them down in only a hit or two. So while they can defend a carcass from hordes of smaller scavengers, they don't have much counterplay towards bigger, more aggressive brawlers.
The command post is now under hostile control.
The woodpecker build spent the bulk of their evolution points optimizing and perfecting the peck attack, both in power and efficiency, with one goal in mind: to be able to hit insect players through cover. Burrowing is one of the safest, most effective ways insect players can avoid combat. But the woodpecker absolutely demolishes this strategy. One of the main advantages of this strategy is that having a powerful beak that's highly effective at drilling through wood also just means you've got a super sharp beak that's highly effective as a general purpose weapon. One of the main disadvantages of this strategy is that pecking at wood gives the woodpecker's location away, alerting more powerful predators to its presence while it's in the middle of pecking and is distracted.
Woodpeckers, nature's very own power drills with wings. They've mastered the fine art of pest control, fearlessly turning timber into Swiss cheese to snag those elusive insects. But in their relentless pursuit of a meal, they're basically ringing the dinner bell for predators far higher up on the food chain. It's a tough gig when your most defining skill is also your biggest blabbermouth. Imagine being that dedicated to work and realizing your office job is the reason why someone keeps trying to eat you. Evolution might want to consider noise canceling as their next upgrade.
One particular woodpecker build, the toucan, opted to spec into more bulk and an even more powerful beak, which, while less useful for attacking insects through the wood, is still extremely powerful for PvP. All in all, interesting strategy. By no means flawless, but definitely has some solid strengths. So I know I've been pretty hard on flightless birds up until now, so you might be surprised to see me rate penguins as upper mid-tier rather than low tier. The difference is, penguins actually swapped out their wings for an arguably equally viable alternative, flippers, which essentially allow them to fly through the water with incredible agility. This gives them a downright broken matchup against fish. However, this strategy is pretty much only viable on servers where there are no land-based predators that penguins would still need to worry about. So if for whatever reason a few polar bears ever spawn in the Antarctic server, it's kind of game over for that entire build. The predators they have to contend with in the water are even more dangerous, and while their agility does help them dodge attacks, ultimately it's still a totally one-sided matchup. Their strategy is pretty cool and actually fairly dominant due to limited competition, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the entire penguin player base collapse if the devs ever add new DLC in the form of an Antarctic land predator, or even if they just buff the land mobility of the leopard seal. Still, top of C tier is a respectable position for a flightless bird. At the bottom of B tier we have the goose.
Hold up. Did you all see that? Penguins, the tuxedoed torpedoes of the icy realms. They've mastered swimming to the point of making fish look like they're wearing water wings. But put them within a whisker's reach of a land-based predator, and their majestic underwater acrobatics would be as useful as a chocolate teapot. It's fascinating, an entire existence balanced on the thread of, please, no polar bear updates. One has to marvel at their strategy of dominating a space simply because no one's bothered to code in a real threat yet. So, enjoy that top C tier while it lasts, penguins. Nature might just surprise you with the ultimate patch note.
I've got an entire video dedicated to the Goose build, but in short, the Goose has solid base stats, including above average hit points. However, its abysmal power stat leads it to rely heavily on intimidation to secure territory. This can be unbelievably effective at times, and it's not uncommon to see top-tier predators flee an encounter that they easily could have won. Still, the obvious flaw in this strategy is that if the Goose's opponent resists being frightened, the Goose will be wide open to a punishing counterattack. In addition, the Goose's weak spot is easily exploitable by intelligent players, so careless aggression tends to be the Goose's biggest strength and biggest weakness at the same time. All in all, still a surprisingly effective strategy. The Heron build put a huge amount of evolution points into maxing out the puncture damage it can deal with its beak, and it did so to great success. Herons have one of the highest damage pecks of any bird, and frequently one-hit their targets, even those with scale armor like large fish and juvenile crocodiles. The effectiveness of their piercing attack is amplified by their long neck, which gives their attacks a deceptively long range, giving their strikes an almost cobra-like flash to them. They have downright oppressive matchups against fish, amphibians, and all other small aquatic builds. One vulnerability they do have is that their flight ability has a lot of startup, making it a bit less reliable as an escape option if they do happen to get ambushed. Still, it's certainly not terrible. Another weakness is that their long neck presents a bit of a weak point, making lunging forward with repeated pecking attacks a bit risky if you get too predictable about it. Good players will be able to punish careless lunges quite hard. In high B tier we have the Falcon, a raptor build that opts to defeat its opponents using
Herons, the bird equivalent of a fencer with a bazooka for a rapier, puncturing their way through life with elegance and lethality. Imagine the confidence needed when your gameplay involves style points for spearing through armor like a well-dressed assassin. But alas, that long neck, while an excellent weapon, is their Achilles heel, one predictably misplaced peck, and its curtains for their majestic duel. It's a classic case of high risk, high frame count on their escape animation. If you've enjoyed this bird-brained analysis, how about maxing out your support points by giving this video a like? It's the least you can do while these herons are out there jousting for survival.
Speed and superior maneuvering rather than actual power. Falcons actually have a below-average power stat for a raptor, and don't deal particularly high damage in close combat. Their talons are pretty small compared to hawks, owls, and eagles, and so instead of slashing and stabbing with their claws, falcons actually punch with their feet to disorient or concuss their target, and then finish the fight with their more powerful beak. In the right situation, this can deal absolutely massive damage, enough to one-shot a mid-sized target at full HP. The drawback of this strategy is that falcons can only dish out high damage when they have the time to build up speed first. This makes the falcon a pretty poor defender for objective game modes, and means the falcon can struggle to win fights if its first attack doesn't connect, as follow-up attacks will likely not have the same force built up as the first.
Falcons, proof that sometimes style over substance does actually work if you're fast enough to outmaneuver any sensible critique. With talons more suited for a casual handshake than a Mortal Kombat showdown, these speed demons prefer a good sucker punch, followed by a beak bash. It's the avian equivalent of a high-stakes game of tag with their opponents. But let's be real, if they miss their flashy opener, the Falcon's bravado drops faster than your Wi-Fi during a cat video marathon. In essence, they're like the daredevils of ornithology. Win big or nosedive spectacularly.
Still, the burst damage potential of this build cannot be ignored, so it earns its spot in high B tier. This might seem like an odd inclusion to cap off B tier, but songbirds are a highly efficient build for their size and do deserve recognition on this tier list. This is a huge group including finches, starlings, sparrows, wrens, and birds of paradise. And while some are flashier than others, they all have relatively similar stats, with extremely high agility being their core stat. Unlike many of the builds lower on the tier list that have difficulty getting themselves airborne quickly, songbirds have extremely low startup on their flight move, allowing them to reposition themselves easily and quickly. This makes their approach very difficult to punish, making songbirds excellent at chipping away at defensive players, and makes them great at stealing loot from slower builds.
Yoink.
Their safety in numbers strategy can actually be somewhat intimidating and disorienting too, making it rather difficult to attack a party of songbirds mid-flight. While they certainly aren't invincible, having
Songbirds, the miniature maestros of the airspace, darting around like caffeinated pixies. Despite their size, they're like the street racers of the avian world, boasting agility that puts standard evasive maneuvers to shame. You've got to admire how they've turned strength in numbers into both a defense and a crime syndicate-style looting operation. Who needs muscle when you've got a wiggle that's practically untouchable? I bet while larger birds are training in fit for battle, songbirds are having parties in the sky, plotting their next heist. Truly, evolution's little hustlers.
one of the lower HP stats among birds, they're an often overlooked but undoubtedly successful bird build. At the bottom of A tier we have the swan. The swan is essentially a goose that has the power stat to actually back up its attempts to intimidate. The wing attacks that most bird players use do very little damage and aren't very useful aside from pushing other players around. The swan's wing attack can break bones and concuss foes. Because of this, swans are one of the best builds at controlling important points of interest, as their hyper-aggressive playstyle can result in huge territory gains. Of course, they do have the same weaknesses as geese, so targeting the swan's neck with an attack can defuse the threat. But this is a bit riskier of a play against a swan than against a goose. All around, sturdy defender, definitely A tier. Next in A tier we have the Owl, the Avian faction's premier stealth assassin build. It owes this reputation to its special ability, which allows it to fly completely silently. This makes the Owl's strikes very difficult to defend against, as players just about never see them coming. While not
Swans, the glamorous bodyguards of the avian world. Take a goose, beef it up, and suddenly you've got a bouncer with feathers. Their ability to break bones with a mere wing bash? It's like finding out the dainty ballerina is secretly a champion arm wrestler. But let's not forget, despite their temper and territory claims, they still wear their weaknesses, literally, on their sleeves or necks as it were. A more formidable rival than the goose, sure, but somehow still vulnerable to the strategic nutmeg. Meanwhile, owls are the secret agents of the skies, flying under the radar with silence as their ally. Who knew the birds that go who could also be the ones you never hear coming?
as stacked in the power department as their daytime counterparts, owls do have quite solid base stats. While they aren't likely to one-shot high HP targets, they do have enough force behind their attacks to be able to defend themselves and their territory, even from powerful enemies. In addition to granting the owl the silent flight perk, the owl's thick, bushy feathers offer additional defense against attacks, enabling it to stand its ground in important objective defense scenarios. Interestingly, the silent flight perk did come at the cost of the waterproof ability that most bird feathers have, meaning that falling into the water or getting caught in a rainstorm can actually disable the owl's flight ability. A pretty unique weakness, and certainly something that can be played around, but interesting nonetheless. In the middle of A tier we have the eagles and hawks. Hawks and eagles follow the same basic strategy, both having tailored their builds to focus on dealing maximum damage with their talons. Hawks are the smaller variants of this group, and because of this they are far more agile.
Owls, the ninjas of the bird realm, trading waterproof capabilities for a stealthy approach that would make any spy envious. It's like choosing a tuxedo over a raincoat. Do you want to look slick or stay dry? This leaves them with a charming vulnerability to a good downpour, though. For all their stealth and defense prowess, they better keep an eye on the weather app. It's curious how nature makes these trade-offs, like an RPG character maxing out in stealth only to be undone by a puddle. What do you think? Would you forgo all weather feathers for a silent approach, or keep yourself waterproof and audible? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
While not as powerful as eagles, their agility enables them to weave through cover better than most birds of prey. This makes them well suited for rushing down players both in open terrain and in dense, difficult to navigate terrain like forests. Eagles, in contrast, are much more powerful, but their larger size and wider wingspan prevents them from entering dense forests. Still, in open prairies and mountains, eagles can be incredibly effective, dealing absolutely brutal damage with their enormous dagger-like talons. Enough to take down players in higher weight classes without even requiring team strategies. These are without a doubt some of the strongest bird builds in the game for PvP, and have been for quite some time. At the top of A tier, we have the grappler tank hybrid, the Pelican. The Pelican's main strength is its throat pouch. Grappling enemy players can be a highly effective
Eagles and Hawks, the aerial MMA fighters. Agility for the Hawks and raw power for the Eagles. If you've got targets in a maze, send a Hawk. But if you're going for a heavyweight bout on open ground, the Eagle's your champion. It's almost like choosing between a nimble martial artist or a heavyweight boxer. Their ability to rule different terrains is impressive, but let's not overlook the Pelicans making their surprise appearance as grappler tanks. I mean, who knew a throat pouch would be the secret path to avian top-tier status? It's as if evolution was like, let's throw a twist and see what happens. Nature's sense of balance or comedic timing? You decide.
Takedown strategy, but birds struggle with this since they can't use their wings to grab, and since their beaks aren't always the most reliable grappling weapons, sometimes leading to targets escaping. The Pelican's grapple is, in contrast, almost totally inescapable, and works on targets much larger than you might think. While this attack style is most effective against fish, it's quite powerful against other bird, rodent, and amphibian players, although it does have its limitations. This, combined with the Pelican's overall bulk, makes it one of the most difficult birds to take down in single combat, and enables it to stand its ground against even top tiers like canines.
Pelicans, who knew those oversized bills weren't just for comically dramatic water scooping? Turns out, their bulk and that storage unit of a throat pouch make them the sumo wrestlers of the bird world. While most birds chip away at their foes with finesse or speed, the pelican goes full tank mode without a care for the usual feathery grace. It's as if nature decided it'd be hilarious to slap extra carrying capacity on a creature just for kicks. Surely not the most elegant defender, but definitely one of the sturdiest, and probably the least fun opponent for a creature the size of a small rodent.
So those of you who follow the channel for a while can probably guess what the top tier birds are going to be. If you can't, that's probably a good indication that you should be subscribed. Those of you wishing the devs could unban the Velociraptor build, look no further than the Secretary bird, as it has basically all the same awesome abilities and more. Hunting on foot and in pairs, they prove time and time again that striking from the sky is overrated. They can easily defeat other high-tier builds such as the Cobra and Mongoose with their high-damage kicks. Their stomp move has extremely high accuracy, allowing Secretary Bird players to score game-ending headshots with ease, and they do all this without completely sacrificing their flight ability. If they ever find themselves outmatched, which only ever happens against builds in higher weight classes, they can still retreat to the sky or treetops. The fact that this strategy works in Africa.
Let's take a moment to appreciate what just happened. The Secretary Bird, nature's way of saying, who needs wings when you've got killer legs? Seriously, it's like someone mashed a velociraptor and a ninja together and then threw in a pair of tweed slacks for good measure. With deadly, accurate stomp attacks and the boldness to hunt cobras and mongooses on foot, they've turned the skies into a vacation home rather than a battlefield. They're not sacrificing flight, but merely keeping it as a stylish exit strategy if things get a tad too dicey. So, as the undisputed leaders of the ground-based bird world, they remind us that sometimes the most lethal predators are just strutting their stuff on the catwalk of life.
One of the most unforgiving servers of all time is proof enough to me that this is the optimal raptor. These last two builds are about equally matched, both opting for the same specialization, intelligence. Parrots are an extremely unique build with several powerful abilities, not the least of which is their sonic shriek, which can drive away just about any player who invaded their territory, especially when employed by a coordinated team. In addition, due to their prehensile beak, parrots have the highest dexterity of any bird, putting them among the best users of the tool use ability. And with an extremely high lifespan, if there was any build that could replace humans if humans ever get their intelligence nerfed, I'd bet on the parrot. I made an entire video on parrots if you're interested, but when it comes to intelligence, there's one avian build that arguably outclasses.
Can we just talk about this for a second? Parrots, the avian masterminds perched on the edge of replacing us should humanity's IQ points ever plummet. And frankly, given recent trends, that's not off the table. With their vuvuzela-level sonic shrieks and a penchant for strategic teamwork, they're the tacticians your local chess club wishes they could be. The fact their absurdly dexterous beaks rival human tool use is just the cherry on top of this potential bird takeover. They've got the longevity to rival myths and the cunning intellect to keep us all on our toes. If there's ever a dystopian future where birds rule the world, you can bet these feathered brainiacs will be sitting on the throne, probably mocking us with our own words. Evolution's little jest, presented in Technicolor plumage.
Corvids, such as magpies, crows, and ravens, also opt for a high-intelligence playstyle, but with a far more expansive social aspect to it. While plenty of bird builds use cooperative team strats, the best corvids operate using a network effect, where knowledge is shared with a huge amount of players over vast distances. This knowledge can include useful points of interest, or even blacklists of dangerous areas or players to avoid. But even individually, corvids have a lot going for them. With significantly higher stealth than parrots, corvids are much better at staying out of conflict. Their pointy beaks, while not as useful for tools.
Corvids, the stealthy ninjas of the bird world, outsmarting danger without having to squawk it away like their colorful cousins. With a knack for subtly navigating their world, they've got a kind of James Bond charisma. Only instead of a license to kill, they've got a license to dodge. Quite the tactical advantage when you'd rather observe humans making fools of themselves than join the squabble, eh? Who needs feathers of many colors when you can work in the shadows and likely end up on more bird intelligence watch lists than any parrot ever could? Truly, the low-key geniuses in the ornithological hierarchy.
Tool use are a much better combat tool for dealing quick damage. It's also more useful for pressuring and poking opponents, or for provoking larger players into battle, so that they can reap the benefits of the aftermath. Corvids are one of the best builds at making use of human-made items, and quickly figure out ways of abusing the system to score quick loot. All in all, corvids are basically what you'd get if you gave monkeys wings. Easily a top-tier build. So there you have it, the complete bird tier list. Or rather, as complete as I thought possible for YouTube. If I didn't do a segment on your favorite bird, please let me know in the comments. Despite being the longest video I've ever made, there were still a few birds that I cut from the video for time's sake, or because I felt I couldn't discuss the bird properly without getting into territory that was potentially too violent for YouTube. If you're interested in watching the full director's cut version of this video,
Corvids, the feathered rogues of the sky, wielding their pointy beaks like expert fencers. Forget talking parrots or dive-bombing hawks. These birds are masters at exploiting the chaos and aftermath of any skirmish. Imagine giving monkeys wings, and suddenly you've got a brainstorm of mischievous innovation, capable of wielding anything us humans mistakenly leave behind. It's no surprise they've swooped up a top-tier status. They've practically turned survival into a cheeky art form. Just proves that smarts and a hint of opportunistic mischief can get you further than brute strength ever could. Simply genius.
it's available to watch on Nebula, a subscription streaming service built by and for creators. Nebula comes bundled for free with CuriosityStream, another awesome streaming service and longtime sponsor of the channel. CuriosityStream is home to the highest quality nonfiction content around, with several thousand documentaries available for streaming on all devices. Normally I'm always plugging their incredible dinosaur content, which they have in spades, but this time I'd like to draw attention to this great little documentary called These Birds Were Made for Walking, which does a great job explaining the process by which birds evolve flightlessness. It's super interesting, so please, head to the link in the description, pick up that sweet 26% off deal, a year's worth of CuriosityStream for less than $15, and enjoy both the extended edition of the bird tier list as well as the Walking Birds documentary. Thank you so much for watching, thanks especially to my patrons on Patreon.
A director's cut for a bird tier list? Yes, folks, we've officially reached the zenith of avian cinema. Not only can you delve deeper into the feathered hierarchy, but you can also indulge your cerebellum in a documentary that promises to answer the age-old question, why walk when you can fly? Talk about irony becoming an art form. Even the most mundane of feathered feet deserve their moment in the spotlight, or at least a cozy documentary. So, if you're one for more bird-brained antics and a sprinkle of evolutionary insight, do meander over to the streaming buffet of knowledge. After all, who knew birds could have you binge-watching documentaries faster than you can say plumage?
And I'll see y'all in the next video.
And there you have it, lab rats, the ultimate avian showdown, where wings, beaks, and the occasional sharp wit take center stage. From the speedy falcons to the conniving corvids, it's clear that the bird world is nothing short of a feathery soap opera with a sprinkle of Darwin's finest. If you enjoyed soaring through this snarky sky with me and got a chuckle or two from the bird-brained tomfoolery, do yourself a favor and subscribe to the channel. Keep fueling my existence with your validation, and who knows, maybe next time we'll roast another kingdom or two together. Until then, keep those beaks sharp and those brains sharp